4, 3, 2, 1.
Tom, thank you for being with us. Let's start from the top. What's one thing we should hold on to from what happened last night?
Israel's attack last night on Iranian nuclear sites and regime infrastructure and personnel is really one for the history books. It's being compared to the opening of the Six-Day War in 1967, when Israel crippled 3 Arab air forces in a matter of hours. And in fact, some military commentators in Britain and America are saying it's one of the most impressive surprise attacks by any army in history.
I appreciate you walking us through this, but why did Israel decide to act now? Or what changed?
I'm Tom Gross. I'm a journalist and commentator specializing in the Middle East and international affairs in general. I've covered the region mainly from Jerusalem, but I've traveled widely, and I've also served as an informal advisor to various people in government in the United States, European governments, and also in the Middle East. Israel has been warning for years that it won't allow the Islamic regime in Iran to acquire nuclear weapons. And although it's been using other methods to try and stop or slow down the program of nuclear weapons, it's used the Stuxnet computer virus against the centrifuges. It's hit nuclear sites before in small operations. It's hit nuclear scientists in small operations over the years. But in spite of that, the Iranian regime has been making fast and steady progress towards nuclear bombs in the enrichment of uranium, and intelligence showed that it may have enough material to build up to 50 nuclear bombs really within days. So Israel could not wait any longer.
Did you say days as in days away from a nuclear breakout?
Yes. Some intelligence reports are saying within a matter of days, if not days, 2 or 3 weeks, and therefore Israel really could not wait any longer.
What do we know actually about the damage? What was hit in that first wave, and what survived?
The damage has been widespread and really quite amazing. You've got to remember, Israel is a tiny geographic country, and Iran is a huge country. So around 200 Israeli aircraft were used to hit about 100 targets. This includes the Natanz uranium enrichment facility, which has been partially destroyed. The other two main facilities for enriching uranium, which is Fordo and Isfahan, have not yet been hit. Fordo is dug inside a mountain, and it's not clear that you can just bomb it from the air. You may have to go in on the ground. But I should also add that part of the operation yesterday involved a unit set up inside Iran by the Israeli intelligence agency, the Mossad. So this is really a remarkable penetration by Israeli intelligence. In addition to physical sites, Israel has killed the leading commander of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, the head of the Iranian army, and some of the leading nuclear scientists in pinpoint targeted operations. This is clearly years of intelligence in the making to know their exact location and to successfully manage to assassinate such leaders. I should point out that in World War II, Winston Churchill ordered the British to assassinate German scientists, but they were all gathered in one place, and it was relatively easy in an intelligence way for Britain to do that. This is an incredible intelligence and logistical achievement by Israel.
Israel went straight to for the top, the leadership. Is this just about pressure, or are we looking at something bigger? Are they trying to shake the regime itself?
Not necessarily. I don't think Israel feels it's Israel's job to topple another regime. However, certainly not many people would be unhappy in Israel, or indeed in the Arab world, or indeed in much of the world, and most importantly in Iran itself, if the regime was to cede power or collapse. You know, I saw on Iranian opposition social media an interesting graffiti this morning, new graffiti on a wall in Tehran, saying, "Thank you, Israel, hit the regime hard and then leave the rest to us." So I think there are large support within Iran for anti-regime forces. We have to see how this plays out, but it's possible that Iranians themselves will attempt to topple the regime sometime in the near future.
Let me ask the blunt version. If the regime does not fall, what is the end game for Israel? What's the actual objective here?
The immediate aim of Israel is to set back by many years the Iranian nuclear program. You know, if we recall, back in 1981, when Iraq was headed by Saddam Hussein, Israel had a preemptive strike against Saddam Hussein's nuclear program in Osirak. Israel did not completely destroy Saddam's nuclear program, and some experts said, oh, Saddam will rebuild it. But in fact, he never did rebuild his nuclear program because it was sufficiently damaged, plus the deterrence was there in future. Likewise, in 2007, Israel hit Bashar Assad's nuclear program in Syria. And as far as I'm aware, Assad also never managed to pursue a nuclear program after that. Now, the Iranian program is much more widespread, much more entrenched, and much harder to set back. Nevertheless, those people who say if Israel only manages to partially destroy the nuclear program, that's not good enough. From Israel's point of view, and even a partial destruction could be enough for the regime to either give up its goals of getting nuclear weapons, or, you know, Israel will simply do it again at some point in future if Iran tries to rebuild.
You mentioned Iraq, but that took 20 years after the strike for Saddam to fall, and Assad stayed for more than a decade under the pressure. So, is this really Israel's playbook? Slow attrition? Because in the Arab imagination, war still means 1967. You go on, strike hard, and it's over. But this feels, in a way, different.
Well, as far as I'm aware, both Saddam Hussein and Bashar Assad, in some respects, were worse dictators than the Iranian regime, in the sense that they ran almost totalitarian, fascistic type regimes, which were very hard to topple. They also might have had among their supporters a certain degree of legitimacy, and Israel's strikes were much smaller in both the cases of Iraq and Syria because their nuclear programs were at a much earlier stage. So it wasn't such a widespread set of airstrikes as is the case now. In this case, as we saw last night, and surely this is only the beginning, we're likely to see more strikes in the coming days and hours. The Iranian regime is already greatly weakened by a series of sort of counter-revolutionary protests. We have, you know, as far back as 2009, the Green Revolution in Iran. More recently, we have the so-called Women Life Freedom movement, and the regime is already deeply unpopular. So I would make a comparison to maybe Assad's more recent fall in Syria, where the regime of Assad toppled much more quickly than people thought. Now, I'm not predicting that the Iranian regime is about to collapse, but we will see what happens. These strikes could set in motion something that will lead it to collapse much more quickly than the 20 years you mentioned with Saddam or Assad.
You talked about the reaction from ordinary Iranians, the opposition. But what about the regime? What kind of response are we expecting from inside the system itself?
Publicly, the regime is putting on a brave face. It's vowing, huge revenge. It will probably threaten both Israel and the United States, even though the United States claims that it had no involvement with Israeli actions. It will probably also try and hit Israeli or Jewish targets globally, not just in Israel. But, you know, Israel is prepared for this. This is obviously a calculated risk by Israel to hit Iran last night. It's a risk that the Israeli government and probably most of the Israeli opposition agree with the government in this case. It's a risk worth taking. Obviously, Israel would prefer it if Iran had signed an agreement to stop all enrichment of uranium of the kind that Donald Trump and presidents in America before him and the Europeans and others have been asking the Iranian regime to do. No one wants a set of airstrikes like this. No one wants conflict. But at some point, sometimes conflict is necessary.
That's fascinating, and it raises a big question. If Iran is weakened now, do you think Israel would be open to a deal, any deal, that Trump might strike? Could this be the moment where diplomacy actually becomes more likely, not less likely?
Donald Trump has welcomed the Israeli strikes last night. He has called them excellent, and he's warned of many more to come. And he has called upon the Islamic regime in Iran to swiftly conclude a deal with the United States. Now, the only deal that Israel would regard as satisfactory is the kind of deal that Colonel Gaddafi did in Libya, where he agreed for his enriched uranium to be moved out of the territory of Libya. So if Iran would agree to dismantle its nuclear sites and move its existing enriched uranium elsewhere, Russia has been talked about as one possible location that could receive and store such enriched uranium, then this, I think, would definitely satisfy the United States and Israel. But any other kind of games by the regime, where the regime is just buying time while it continues to push ahead as fast as it can with its pursuit of nuclear weapons, I don't think will be acceptable to Israel. And I think Israel will continue to strike until such time that the nuclear weapons program is severely depleted. And I believe that whatever they say publicly, most Arab and Western governments will be quietly happy with Israel doing so.
Since we're here, U.S.-Israel coordination, there's been so much noise last week or the last few days about Netanyahu and Trump not being on the same page. But from where you sit, how do you read the actual level of coordination, and what do you think that relationship looks like going forward?
I think the Israeli-American relationship is strong. And I think some of what we hear is media speculation by journalists in America or Israel who do not like the governments of Donald Trump or Benjamin Netanyahu, and therefore they're trying to stir things up with all kinds of rumors and the like, which may not be accurate. Now, this doesn't mean that Israel and America see eye to eye on everything. Of course they don't. But I think there is agreement that neither country wants Iran to go nuclear. And indeed, I think that America's allies in the Arab world, especially in the Gulf, will share that concern and have also been sort of giving the nod to Trump to give the nod to Israel to do this. The question really was whether America needed to be involved directly, or whether the Israeli Air Force and the Israeli intelligence could do this by themselves, albeit with possible intelligence or other weapons supply from the United States.
Do you think some Arab capitals are breathing easier today, especially in the Gulf countries? Are they quietly relieved?
Well, I think everyone is nervous because we don't know how the Islamic regime are going to react, and they may react against Arab countries as well as against Israel, and therefore people are right to be nervous. And the Saudi government has put out a statement condemning the Israeli acts, but I read that more as a kind of message to Iran: please don't hit us, we're nothing to do with this. But, you know, certainly from people I speak to in the Arab world, there is very few people that will be unhappy at Israel hitting the Iranian regime, pretty much the same as when Israel hit Hezbollah, the Iranian proxy militia in Lebanon. There was public condemnation, but I think most people who are not supporters of the Iranian regime were quietly satisfied with Israeli actions. Of course, no one wants to see anybody get killed, particularly civilians, of course, which is why Israel does its utmost to avoid harming any civilians. But overall, I think that most people in the Middle East and wider world are satisfied with Israeli actions, if not fully supportive of it. And that would include among some people in Gaza, because there are many Palestinians who hate the Islamic regime because they see them as the ultimate influencers of Hamas, and they see Hamas having launched an unnecessary war on Israel in full knowledge that Palestinian civilians, with whom Hamas hides behind, would bear the full wrath and brunt of Israel. So whereas people in Gaza may be very unhappy with Israel for bombing them, they're equally unhappy or even more unhappy with Iran for basically provoking Hamas into this war in the first place.
Given the reaction from Gaza, maybe even from some parts of the Arab world, is this an opening for Israel, a moment to actually launch a political initiative, not just military action? Could this be the window for something bigger, a regional agreement, even peace talks?
I think we will see political initiatives the moment Hamas surrender or give up power or are beaten. I don't think one can have speculative political initiatives while Hamas are still in control. Hamas are greatly weakened, but they are still in control, although I hope very much for everyone's sake, mostly for the sake of the poor population of Gaza, that Hamas realize that they cannot win this war and they give up. And Israel has offered safe passage to many senior Hamas figures to live in exile. But they have to give up arms, they have to give up power. After this is the time for regional initiatives to improve and rebuild Gaza, and to make sure that Gaza will then have a government that actually cares about the population of Gaza, instead of putting all its money and resources into jihad in a kind of futile fight against Israel. It will concentrate on the well-being of the people of Gaza.
That brings me to Israel itself. You have laid out the effect on Iran and its proxies, but what about inside Israel? How does this reshape the internal political map? Does this strengthen Netanyahu in Israel? We know the opposition is there. And if you were advising the Israeli government today, what would you tell them to do right now?
No, Israel is a very divided society. It may not look so from outside, but it's very, very divided on all kinds of issues, including Netanyahu. A large section of the Israeli public hate him because they think he's been in power far too long. It's not healthy in a democracy for anyone to stay in power. Even though Netanyahu does manage to win elections, they wish Israel had term limits like France or the United States, where you're only allowed to serve 2 terms in office. Israel doesn't have term limits, and therefore Netanyahu has managed to win about 5 or 6 elections. However, on this point of striking the Iranian nuclear program, pretty much everyone in Israel is backing Netanyahu, including the 20% of the Israeli citizens who are Arab Israelis. They have also been the victims of Iranian proxy militia like Hezbollah. Hezbollah have killed a lot of Israeli Arabs through their rocket strikes during this war. Israeli Arabs have also had to run to bomb shelters. So on this particular point, if there's anything that unites Israelis, it's this, that they will not allow Iran to go nuclear, and if necessary, Israel has to take military action of the kind we are now seeing to stop that.
Outside of Gaza and Lebanon, there's Yemen, Iraq, Syria, and other Arab states. When you look at the map this morning, how do you see the region, and where do you think it will stand 2 weeks from now once this whole campaign wraps up?
You know, I'm an optimist by nature, and I think too much energy has been used in the Middle East on war, either through nationalism or through dictatorship or through radical religion, especially radical both Sunni and Shia Islam. So I kind of remain an optimist. Why do I say this? The Abraham Accords, which we saw in the first Trump term, where peace deals, quite good, firm peace deals, were made between Israel, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Morocco, to a lesser extent Sudan. I think we're on the verge of seeing similar deals with countries like Saudi Arabia, but also now with Syria and Lebanon, now that the Assad regime is out of power. I'm optimistic, for example, that Syria, it won't be easy and it won't be perfect for the new government, but my sense is that the government will be a moderate government and be one that wants peace with its neighbors, including Israel, and therefore Lebanon will also become a more peaceful country. My sense is that if the Iranian regime goes, the radical Shiism will be greatly weakened, and therefore also radical Sunnism, because part of radical Sunnism is a mirror reaction to the 1979 radical Shiism. And we all see that in Saudi Arabia and elsewhere, a slight moderation of Islam, as like opening of society, more liberalism, i.e. heading in the right direction. So I don't want to jump the gun. I'm not suggesting there's going to be peace everywhere in the Middle East, but the removal or weakening of the Iranian regime is a very important step in allowing other countries in the Middle East to become more peaceful and more prosperous.
Tom, I know that you are careful with predictions, but I once heard someone say that a good analysis should at least try. So let me throw a few keywords at you and you give me your read. Where are Israeli-Turkish relations heading?
I think that's a very interesting question because Turkey remains a major power, and it's one that has its own ambitions. And Turkish troops still occupy large parts of northern Syria, which Israel's not happy about. And Turkey remains up to a point a supporter of Hamas. So Israeli-Turkish relations are something to watch in future. Right now, Israel has more important matters on its plate.
Will Iran lean hard on its Iraqi proxies?
Iranian proxies have been greatly weakened. Of course, Hezbollah are a pale shadow of themselves after the so-called Beeper attacks and other attacks on it by Israel. Hamas are severely degraded, and I don't believe they can, rebuild. Israel is determined to make sure they no longer stay in power. The Houthis are still proving difficult. They're sending over missiles, but Israel has developed world-class missile defense, which shoots down these Houthi missiles, and therefore, they're not as effective a deterrent as they were. So I think one of the reasons Israel has been able to hit Iran last night and at the present time is precisely because Iranians' proxies are not what they were a year ago.
And finally, will this campaign actually wrap in 14 days, in 2 weeks, like some reports suggest, or are we just getting started and it might be really open?
I don't think anyone can predict how long it will last. It may last only a day or two. It may last longer. If I was the Iranian regime, I would cut my losses. I would make a nuclear deal right now with the United States, and I would sit quietly. I would probably moderate to satisfy the Iranian population. One of the chants of the opposition in Iran is not Gaza, not Lebanon, we are for the people of Iran. In other words, stop wasting money, spending money on futile campaigns against Israel through Hamas and Hezbollah, and spend the money building a better country for Iran. If the regime wants to survive in the long term, it should reform. If I was the supreme leader, I would cut my losses and ask for a ceasefire and agree to dismantle my nuclear program. However, since the leader may well not do so, then I think Israel will continue as long as it needs to continue.
Before we go, is there anything you would leave us with, a final thought a warning, maybe a question we should all be asking?
I also remain an optimist for Israeli-Iranian relations. You know, I do interviews for Iranian opposition channels. I cannot tell you, I have more support for my views from Iranians in Iran than I do from kind of progressive types at universities in the West, who are a bit out of touch in my view. I also think the Arab world, look, Israel is not perfect. Clearly something has to be done to make the situation better for Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. And Israel too obviously needs to have firm, solid, agreed borders and good relations with all its neighbors, especially the Palestinians. But overall, I actually remain an optimist. And sometimes horrible war leads to better things. On a final thought, I give you Germany and Japan. In the Second World War, both the regimes of the Nazi regime in Germany, the imperial regime in Japan, many crimes were committed by those regimes on their neighbors. No one could have imagined that 80 years later, we have a good, solid peace between Germany and the other countries of Europe which they invaded, and between Japan and other countries of Asia which Japan hit. And that's because those regimes, Nazi Germany and Japanese regime, were defeated. And sometimes you need to take military action to have a better outcome afterwards.